Have you ever witnessed a running back score 20 or more rushing touchdowns in a single season before? Because it hasn't happened since 2006.
Skirts it outside, into the end zone. Charger fans are witnesses to history.
Not Adrian Peterson, Christian McCaffrey, Jim Brown. I could go on and on about some of the greatest running backs in history to never pull off this feat because it's so difficult. But today, we're going to figure out who did. Heading into the 1983 season, Redskins running back John Riggins was coming off a Super Bowl victory over the Dolphins where he ran for 166 yards and a touchdown on a mind-blowing 38 carries. Little did NFL fans know at the time, but his best season was still yet to come. Riggins was a hard-nosed back who spent the majority of his career at the fullback position. He was the definition of a workhorse who was not scared of contact. Riggins was the life and soul of the Redskins offense this year, and he opened up the season with 12 straight games of at least one rushing touchdown and only had one game the entire year in which he didn't find the end zone on the ground. Riggins had 2 games in which he rushed for 3 touchdowns during the regular season, but his strongest showing came in week number 6 when Washington took on the St. Louis Cardinals. His 115 yards and 3 touchdowns propelled Washington to a 38-14 win. Riggins finished the regular season with 1,347 yards for 24 touchdowns on 375 carries. This went on to be career highs for him in all 3 of these categories. Along with this, Riggins also led the league in rushing touchdowns and also earned himself a spot on the All-Pro first team. His elite efforts on the ground led Washington all the way to the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, they came up just a bit short of winning it all, falling to the Raiders by a final score of 38-9. Despite the season ending on a sour note, Riggins set the record for what at the time was the most rushing touchdowns in a single season. Up next, we have Joe Morris, and while he's kind of been lost to history since his retirement, he had one of the most impressive seasons from a player at the running back position in 1985. This was the first year that Morris spent as a full-time starter for the Giants, and boy did he take full advantage of that opportunity. While he had a relatively slow first half of the season in terms of rushing touchdowns, only picking up 2 throughout the Giants' first 5 games, he definitely caught fire in the tail end of the year. During this stretch, Morris had 4 games in which he found the end zone 3 times.
Set up by the interception by Terry Kennard, and it's Joe Morris for the touchdown.
His most impressive performance came in the final game of the regular season where the Giants took on the Steelers. He finished that contest with a wild 36 carries for 202 yards and 3 touchdowns. Morris's rushing efforts gave the Giants a comfortable 28-10 win over Pittsburgh that day. When the 1985 regular season came to an end, Morris sat at 1,336 yards and 21 touchdowns on the ground, leading the league in rushing touchdowns, which earned him his first Pro Bowl nomination. Shockingly, he only remained in the league for 5 more years following this historic season. Emmitt Smith is one of the most talented running backs that the game has ever seen, and it shouldn't come as a shock to see his name on this list. He was a huge piece of the Cowboys offense in the 90s. One of Emmitt's best seasons of his career came in 1994, and heading into this season, Smith had already established himself as one of the most talented running backs in the league, coming off an MVP season and back-to-back Super Bowls. He only failed to find the end zone on the ground in one singular game that he played in that 1994 season. While he didn't have any 3-score games on the ground like the previous 2 backs that we talked about, Smith's consistency earned him a spot on this list. His best game of the season came in week number 10 when the Cowboys took on the Giants. This wound up being a blowout win for Dallas, and Smith had an outstanding day on the ground.
22 will go again. 3rd and goal, and there he goes for his 10th rushing touchdown of the season.
He finished with 163 yards and 2 touchdowns, and his team came out on top by a final score of 38-10. Despite missing the final game of the regular season, Smith still finished with 1,484 yards and 21 touchdowns on 368 carries, leading the league in both rushing touchdowns and carries. This earned him both a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro first team. Smith followed up his 1994 season with an even better year in 1995, and currently he stands as one of 2 running backs in NFL history to rack up 20+ rushing touchdowns in back-to-back seasons. While he did fail to have 3 rushing touchdowns in a single game in 1994, he made sure that was not going to happen again in 1995. In the Cowboys opening game, once again against the Giants, Smith had one of the best games of his entire career. He almost single-handedly won this game for Dallas, picking up 163 yards and 4 touchdowns on only 21 carries.
Williams in the slot to the left, and Emmitt Smith's first carry of the season. Goodbye. For the Bucs, he's gone. Emmitt Smith out in front, touchdown Dallas.
The Cowboys easily won this game as well by a final score of 35-0. This set the tone for the 1995 season, and he kept his foot on the gas all 16 games. He once again only had 1 regular season game without a rushing touchdown. When the regular season came to an end, he recorded 1,773 yards and 25 touchdowns on 377 carries, leading the league in all 3 metrics. These 25 rushing touchdowns also broke John Riggins' previous record of 24 and gave Smith the title for the most rushing touchdowns in a single season. This record-breaking year earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro first team, along with finishing in second for Offensive Player of the Year and third for MVP voting. Only 1 year after Emmitt Smith's second elite season, another back joined the 20+ single-season rushing touchdown club, that player being Terry Allen. Allen accomplished this as a member of the Redskins, and he started off the season strong, only having 1 game in which he didn't find the end zone on the ground in a tough Week 7 matchup against the Patriots. However, near the end of the year, Allen had a tough 3-week stretch in which he was unable to find the end zone on the ground even once. Despite this, he still totaled 3 games in which he had a trio of rushing touchdowns, which makes him getting to 20 by the end of the season even more impressive in my eyes. His best game of the year came in Week 9 when Washington took on the Colts. Allen was the deciding factor in this one, picking up 124 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground, helping the Redskins to a 31-16 win. Allen finished the regular season with 1,353 yards and 21 touchdowns, leading the league in rushing touchdowns. This earned him a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro second team. Surprisingly, this was the only year of his entire career that Allen made the Pro Bowl. Now, it didn't take too long for another running back to join this exclusive list, with Terrell Davis doing so in 1998. While Davis had a relatively short NFL career that was riddled by injuries on the tail end, in his peak, he was one of the most talented rushers that the game had ever seen. Heading into the 1998 season, Davis was coming off a year in which he led the league in rushing touchdowns and was an integral piece in the Broncos' Super Bowl winning offense. Even though his 1997 campaign would have been the best year for many Hall of Fame running backs, he found a way to beat it in 1998. He only failed to find the end zone on the ground in 4 out of the 16 games that he played in, and it didn't take him long to have his best rushing performance of the season. This took place in week number 2 when the Broncos took on the Cowboys. Davis could not be stopped in this one, and he went for 191 yards and 3 touchdowns in a dominant 42-23 win. He finished the regular season totaling 2,008 yards and 21 touchdowns on 392 carries. Davis led the league in both rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. However, he also finished on top with 5.1 yards per carry and averaged a league-high 125.5 yards per game. This earned him a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro first team, won the Offensive Player of the Year award, and also took home the MVP. This is one of the best seasons that a running back has ever had, and to put a cherry on top of it all, Davis won his second consecutive Super Bowl to cap off this season. Sadly, he only played 17 more games following that historic season, mainly as a result of his knee injury and his heavy workload catching up to him. Similar to Terrell Davis, Pheoms is another running back who had an extremely short prime, but during his peak, he was one of the most skilled rushers that the game had ever seen. Heading into the 2002 season, he was coming off a year in which he had led the league in rushing yards with 1,555. He followed this up with an even more impressive campaign in 2002. He started the year off with with a ridiculous performance against the Browns. This was a game that came down to the wire, and the Chiefs would have been blown out if it hadn't been for a career game from Holmes. He finished the contest with 122 yards and 4 touchdowns on 22 carries. The Chiefs needed every single yard that they got out of Holmes because they only escaped with a 1-point win, 40-39. While Holmes was unable to have a game that competed with this one in terms of touchdowns, he was still elite through the regular season, only having 2 games in which he failed to find the end zone on the ground. He finished the regular season with 1,615 yards and 21 touchdowns, leading the league in rushing touchdowns. To make these numbers even more impressive, Holmes achieved this while missing the final 2 games of the regular season because of a hip injury. As a result of this elite season, he was named to the Pro Bowl, made the All-Pro First Team, took home the Offensive Player of the Year award, and finished 4th in MVP voting. Holmes followed up his already historic 2002 campaign with an arguably even better season in 2003.
Looking for it, left side has it, and more, down the sideline, 10, 5, touchdown!
Pheoms looked okay.
Despite having hip surgery in the offseason, he was able to suit up for every single game this time. He took full advantage of a 16-game regular season. While he did fail to have a 4-touchdown game like he did in 2002, he finished 4 games with 3 rushing touchdowns. One of his strongest performances of that year came once again in week number 2. This time the Chiefs were taking on the Steelers. Unlike the 2002 week 2 matchup against the Browns, Kansas City had no troubles this time winning the game, coming out on top by a final score of 41-20. Holmes posted a very impressive 122 yards and a trio of touchdowns on the ground. He finished the regular season with 1,420 yards and 27 touchdowns on the ground, leading the league in rushing touchdowns. Not only this, but Holmes also took the record from Emmitt Smith for the most single-season rushing touchdowns. Along with this, he joined Smith as the only 2 running backs in NFL history to ever have back-to-back seasons with 20 or more rushing touchdowns. This incredible season earned Holmes a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro First Team. After this season, Holmes only played in 19 more regular season games before retiring from the league. A brutal spine injury on October 30th, 2005 against the Chargers ultimately put an end to his career and forced him to miss an entire season. But when he was playing at his peak, there was almost no running back in NFL history that could find the end zone as well as Holmes. Only 2 years later, another back had one of the most impressive seasons from a player at the position in history. During his time with the Seattle Seahawks, Shaun Alexander was an unstoppable force on the ground. The best season of his career came in 2005, and no other back in the league even came close to competing with Alexander during that season. While he started the season off on the wrong foot, failing to find the end zone in week number 1, this was not a trend that lasted very long at all. In week number 3, when the Seahawks took on the Cardinals, he absolutely took over the game. He finished with 140 yards and 4 touchdowns on 22 carries. Seattle also had no trouble taking this game, in large part because of their elite game their running back just had on the ground, winning by a final score of 37-12. Interestingly, just 3 games later in week number 6, he posted nearly the exact same stat line. The Seahawks took on the Houston Texans in another matchup that they easily won, this time by a final score of 42-10. Once again, Alexander posted 4 touchdowns and 22 carries.
Alexander breaking tackles, touchdown. That's his 4th rushing touchdown.
He nearly had the exact same numbers as his week 3 explosion, down to 1 yard, picking up 141 yards on the ground against the Texans. He was 140 in week number 3 against the Cardinals. These 2 4-touchdown games led to him having incredible numbers when the regular season came to an end, posting 1,880 yards and 27 touchdowns on 370 carries, leading the league in all 3 metrics. These 27 rushing touchdowns tied him with Pheoms for what was at the time the most single-season rushing touchdowns in NFL history. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, on the All-Pro First Team. He won the Offensive Player of the Year award, and he also took home the MVP. However, it was clear that this season took a lot out of Alexander, as he was unable to play a full regular season for the remainder of his career. Shaun Alexander wasn't the only running back to go for 20 touchdowns in that 2005 season, though. Larry Johnson also joined him in this exclusive club. Johnson took over the starting spot for the Chiefs following the beginning of Pheoms decline. Also playing behind an elite offensive line, Johnson put up some dominant numbers. It did take him some time to take over the starting spot though, as he got his first start of the season in week number 9 when the Chiefs took on the Raiders. Despite serving as the second string up to this point in the season, he was still putting up very strong stats.
No catch in the first 3 quarters. Grandmama! Larry Johnson with Pheoms out.
However, once he gained the starting role, he turned into a whole different beast. He closed out the regular season with his best game of the year against the Cincinnati Bengals. This was a dominant 37-3 win for Kansas City, in large part due to Johnson's performance. He finished the game with 201 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground.
Caught in the backfield, breaks away, and now looks for blocks. He's getting them. Another touchdown. Oh, my.
Despite only starting in 9 games, Johnson still recorded 1,750 yards and 20 touchdowns on the ground. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl along with an All-Pro second-team appearance. And oddly enough, these 2 Chiefs players, Larry Johnson and Pheoms that is, were the most efficient with their touches in terms of yards per carry on this list with 5.2, but our next player had the best season out of everybody, and he also had a yards per carry of 5.2. The most recent season that a player picked up 20 or more rushing touchdowns was in 2006, and it's nearly been 2 decades since a player has pulled off this feat. However, if this is the final occurrence, then LaDainian Tomlinson made sure this record went out on a high note. Tomlinson was one of the most elite and versatile talents that the running back position has ever seen. His unique combination of strength and speed made him almost impossible to bring down. He gave opposing defenses nightmares for the entirety of the 2006 season.
Tomlinson off the left side. Tomlinson sidesteps. Hello, history books.
He had 2 games in which he rushed for 4 touchdowns, but his strongest performance came in week number 10 when the San Diego Chargers took on the Cincinnati Bengals. This was a very tight game for the Chargers, only coming out on top by a final score of 49-41. They would have likely been blown out if it hadn't been for Tomlinson's 104 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. When the regular season came to an end, he recorded 1,815 yards, 28 touchdowns on the ground, along with 508 yards and 3 touchdowns off 56 receptions. Not only did Tomlinson lead the league in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns that year, but he also set the NFL record for most rushing touchdowns in a single season, along with the most touchdowns by a running back in one season with 31 total.
31 touchdowns in one season? It's a crazy number.
These otherworldly stats earned him a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro first team, and he took home both the Offensive Player of the Year and MVP awards. There's definitely a chance that we might not ever see another running back surpass the 20 rushing touchdown mark in a single season because of how much the run game is being phased out and the emphasis on the passing game is just so much higher than it used to be. But if there is a running back in the league right now that you think could put up 20 rushing touchdowns in a single season, I of course want to know who that is in the comment section down below. And also, if you guys are brand new to the channel, hit that like button and subscribe. I will catch you in the next one.